We worked really hard for 4 years to take our country back, to first take the House and then the Senate and the White House. But what's happened? Like, people are feeling shell shock. People are feeling learned helplessness. There's been nothing, because there's no big picture strategy. The way the Republicans are ruthless. They realize that our country's becoming a demographic that's less friendly to them. And they're willing to do whatever it takes to hold on to power.
Okay, we are live, and you're listening to or watching In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And today my guest is Amy Siskind. And the first thing I want to ask Amy, being that I'm a terminal dyslexic, am I saying your last name correctly?
It's Siskind.
Siskind. See, I knew I've heard it. And Ernie, my producer, has to put the name of my book up as a note. He has to put the name of my show up as a note. And I can only remember my daughter Jessica's birthday because how old she is. She's always 51 years now, because I've been with Jeannie 52 years. See, if I got my girlfriend pregnant when we were 17 and 18. So Jessica's always the age we've been together. The rest of the kids, I have no clue. So forgive me for being vague on that. So Amy Siskind is president of the New Agenda, a nonprofit dedicated to the advancement of women and girls.
Yes.
She's also the author of the book that I think came out in 2018. Is that correct?
Yes.
The list, week by week reckoning of Trump's first year, which I guess could be retitled Week by Week Reckoning of Trump's Lies, because the book is really good and goes through the whole thing. And I think most people kind of know who you are. So the first thing I want to ask you, you had mentioned that you had some kind of surgical procedure on your jaw recently. Are you comfortable enough to get through all this? And thank you for doing this after being wounded.
I am, and thank you for having me. And if anyone's watching this visually, that's why I kind of look like a chipmunk, a little swollen, but
yeah,
the jaw's working, talking away.
Yeah.
I'm here to.
So let me start by asking you, just to sort of locate us here. You're in Connecticut, I think, as we speak.
In Westchester County.
In Westchester County, and you come from my part of the world up here in Massachusetts, I believe. You were
born and raised in Marblehead.
Born and raised?
Yes.
And your parents, what were they doing in Marblehead? Had they been there a long time?
My parents, unfortunately, are no longer with us. They had me later in life. They were born in 1918 and 1920. So they raised my 4 brothers and sisters in Swampscott, a town went over. They both of their families came to Boston from various destinations around, mostly Russian Jew or Ashkenazi Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And after my 4 brothers and sisters were already off in college and beyond, we moved to Marblehead when I was actually 2. So their connection to the area was having migrated there and then being very involved in the community.
Did they come to the States, or were they themselves born here, or did they immigrate to America?
They were both born in Massachusetts. My mother was born in Lynn, and my dad was born in Chelsea, but their parents migrated.
I'm always curious, my background had such a big impact on me, and I've left a lot of that evangelical right-wing background. I'm in a very different place, but no less marked by it, if in reaction as much as, by choice. And I'm wondering, I'm curious, because you're a very political person, you're an outspoken commentator, you get out there and do things for women. And did some of that come out of your environment? Were you raised in a political background? Was it similar to the politics that you now hold? Are you a refugee from that background like I am from mine? I just want a little personal history, if you don't mind giving it to.
Oh, sure. I think you're the first person that asked that. But so the project that we're talking about, the list, really came about because of growing up as an American Jew and being very schooled in what happened with Hitler and the Holocaust. And my mother was president of the temple, so I was very proud. I went to Hebrew school. I was at services every week. I was raised religiously. And I could feel literally in my bones as Trump was taking office that this was not right. I feel like that, unfortunately, again now, but it is very much part of, the culture I was brought up in and who I am. And as well, my parents were, as many people in Massachusetts are, fans of the Kennedys and the Roosevelts. And the place that I went the day that I started to actually keep the list was the home of Eleanor Roosevelt in Valkill, which is about an hour and a half from where I live. And I grew up with stories about Eleanor from my mother. I mean, because again, they're from a different era. So she grew up with Eleanor in that time. So Eleanor has always been my North Star of sorts. And that really came from my parents.
When you came out of the background before the politics and all the rest of it, raised with a mother who was president of the temple, how much kind of influence did biblical, knowledge have on you? Was this a very religious family, a secular family, reform, or I'm guessing, I can't guess what, I won't put words in your mouth, but I'm just curious what you took with you in terms of your own exposure to Torah and the biblical narrative and, where you are kind of today. Just talk about that journey, irrespective of politics a little bit.
Yeah, so interesting. I like many, have had a journey with religion. My parents were very religious. In the spectrum of Judaism, you're either Reform, which is the most relaxed, conservative, or Orthodox, which is very far off the spectrum. And I went to a conservative temple. And I think because in part, I was forced to go to Hebrew school 3 times a week, services every Saturday, junior choir every Saturday, that I sort of revolted against it by the time I got to college, and became pretty unreligious during college and after, and reconnected with Judaism when my children, who are now in college and beyond, were young, and we moved to Westchester, and we were trying to figure out where to put them into nursery school. And they we joined the local temple, or I joined the local temple, and they went to nursery school there. And a lot of the first people that I became friends with when I moved to this community were through that connection. So it reintroduced me. And the one thing I love about Judaism, 2 things I love about Judaism: the sense of community and friendship, but also that it's kept with the times. I really appreciate that. I came out later in life, well, not so much later, 20 years ago as a gay woman. And the Jewish religion not only is accepting of the LGBT community, but that we've had women rabbis at my temple. So I feel like, it's the oldest religion, and I think it's survived in part because of staying current. And I appreciate that about it.
Yeah, that's good. And I'm wondering, in that arc and that journey, you brought your children up in your family, and since I write about issues that are grounded in my own family experience, I never know how hard to push for people's information, because in my own books, I tend to tell people everything, and I don't assume that anybody else wants to do that. So just say if I push too hard. But did the person that you had the children with, did you partner with? Did you marry? Is she also from a similar background or from a very different background? I'm curious because I was the son of a fundamentalist preacher in Switzerland, wound up marrying a San Francisco hippie princess. We were 17 and 18. We've been together 51 years now. You could not picture 2 different backgrounds.
Yes.
She knew nothing about anything. When she came to our little religious community in Switzerland, it was just because she was with her sister traveling around Europe on a Eurail pass at age 18.
Wow.
Knew nothing, came through the door. Her sister had a friend there who was a friend of Joan Baez, who had come to see us to see whether Joan wanted to visit my dad, because in those days we weren't right wing yet. We were still sort of cool, and hippies were coming, and so forth and so on. I can't imagine, if you were picking for compatibility and someone said, well, find the exact opposite. Jeannie would have been that. And of course, then we've stuck together. It worked well. So I'm always curious about that with people who have strong relationships and family. So tell me as much as you feel like, or nothing at all, and tell me to mind my own business.
You know, my journey is probably not unusual for a woman my age. I'm 55, and I, for the first 35 years of my life, dated men. I was married to a man. Most of the women that I date were married to men, or at some point in their lives were dating men. I sort of call myself, my super unpower is attracting women who are questioning. And that's, I think, part of the generation I was brought up in, but it's not part of, for my children who are in their young 20s, generation, it's very foreign because it's on the menu. When I was in college, it was not on the menu. I think we've gone through a revolution in being comfortable with being LGBT in a time frame that's sort of unimaginable to me, because 10 years ago, 15 years ago, gay marriage was illegal. And now if you would say something like that, you would be viewed as a bigot. But not so long ago, that was an issue. Having custody of children if you were gay was an issue. So all of these things, I wish the women's movement could mirror some of the successes of the LGBT community and galvanizing around an issue. We galvanized around gay marriage, even though some of in the community were not for it. All the organizations worked together for one common goal, realizing the repercussions of all of it. And that was a successful strategy.
So when you look at that trajectory, one thing that was interesting to me in my background was that my father, who then became one of the founders of the religious right, along with Jerry Falwell and these other people, and we went out with Dr. Sierra Coop, who became Ronald Reagan Surgeon General. We made this film series, Whatever Happened to the Human Race, that people say was the beginning of the transition of evangelicals into the anti-abortion movement, which was thinly veiled misogyny. One thing they don't realize, and I'll mention this to you, and I've written about this, is that when we went out with that series after Roe v. Wade, our first big and hardest hurdle was talking pro-choice evangelical leaders like Dr. Billy Graham, the evangelist, Dr. Criswell, the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, pastor of First Baptist in Dallas, and president of Dallas Theological Seminary, the editors of Christianity Today magazine, all of them told us that they were either ambivalent and or actively pro-choice and approved of Roe v. Wade. A lot of people think that somehow evangelical knee-jerk response is always to the right. And what they forget often is that whether it was the abolitionists or whether it was the child labor laws, and whether it was the first reaction, for instance, in California, when Ronald Reagan legalized abortion, he had the support of evangelicals. That all shifted. And so the paradigm shift that my family was part of, and that I repent of, and I regret, and I've taken the other side now for the better part of 40 years and done my best to ameliorate some of the horrible damage we did. What they don't understand is that it was first a corruption of the best of the evangelical world itself. And I'll give you one example that's a little counterintuitive. You're talking about your lesbian relationships. I grew up in L'Abri Fellowship, my dad's ministry in Switzerland. And we're talking the 50s and early 60s here, okay? This is before any of this is on anybody's wavelength, as you were saying. Jane and Betty, who lived down the road, Jane was an opera singer, Betty a writer. They lived together, I think, for the better part of 60 years. And they were a lesbian couple in all but name. And everybody kind of knew they're a couple. They have a house, they share it, they drive to Italy. Jane reads Medici history to Betty. They talk about it. They come back and show me art books. Jane plays me opera. I learn all who Joan Sutherland and the Casta Diva and Norma is. I write about this and I look back on that relationship as incredibly formative. So here my father is known as a right-wing reactionary who within his own ministry, sort of a don't ask, don't tell policy, not only had room for a lesbian couple who lived together and were workers in the ministry for 50 years, but basically, if anybody brought it up, he just slammed them down so fast it made their head spin, like this is none of our business. So looking back on the evangelicalism I come from, it's bigoted, it's right-wing, it's white nationalist, it's Trump supporters. But I just try to emphasize again that there were elements in it which were actually could have easily been seen as of the left in so many ways. And I just want to throw that out there because it's not something maybe that gets said every day.
What's happening now? It's a grab for power. I mean, look at Trump himself. I mean, how many women do we speculate Trump has been party to at abortions? And
absolutely
some form of punishment. And here we are. I mean, yes, that was a shift to gain power. It's exactly what's happening now when you see your demographics start to shift away politically and you pick an issue.
Well, it seems to me that the big shift that the secular media, if I can put it that way, from a Christian background, there's the secular media and then there's all these Christian embattled victims of the secular media. That's the way I was raised to see it. That the media has missed something, and that is it talks about the Rust Belt and it talks about economics and growth and all the rest of it. What it doesn't understand is there's an actual party of theocracy in this country. They do not like democracy. They haven't trusted it for decades, well, ever since the 1920s and the liberal controversy with fundamentalism. And now with Amy Coney Barrett and other people on the court who, for instance, will even go against health policy to allow churches to meet without masks, or now the anti-vaccine pushback and so on. These folks are not interested in maintaining American democracy. They want to replace it with something closer to what they would call God's law. And I think you coming with a background that has biblical knowledge know perfectly well that we don't want the United States of America modeled on Leviticus, and they do. So how do you see that? I mean, why aren't folks, commentators, picking up on this theocracy movement as an element of our politics and always talking about, the economy and this kind of thing and leaving the theology out of it? Because I don't think you can understand where America is right now without a little bit of a nod towards the theology.
I mean, you're the expert on it, not me, but in observing what the strategy has been as America has become more diverse and there's a need to hold on to power. It always centers back on power. The Republican Party, the day after Roe v. Wade passed, started the effort we're seeing now. They started the effort to take back state legislatures. Now they're starting the effort to take back school boards. So one thing that I really lament as a Democrat is, who are the big thinkers and planners on our side? And people will turn back to me and say, you should be one of them. And I think those of us who have been leading this charge are going to continue, but there needs to be people in a position, like the paper that was written, his name is escaping me, in the mid-1970s about the danger the Republican Party was in and how there was a need to grab onto these kind of issues to keep people together, like the evangelicals. But it's choreographed and planned over decades. And as Democrats, we do the work, we show up and vote. Republicans just show up and vote. So that's one thing that concerns me in the time that we're living in. I think people are aware of how we got here. But I also believe, and this is something I'm very politically involved. I am vocal with my senators and my Congress people and all the rest, that we worked really hard for 4 years to take our country back, to first take the House and then the Senate and the White House. But what's happened? People are feeling shell-shocked. People are feeling learned helplessness. There's been nothing, because there's no big picture strategy. The way the Republicans are ruthless. They realize that our country's becoming a demographic that's less friendly to them. And they're willing to do whatever it takes to hold on to power. And that's what the abortion issue is, anything to take on to power. And we always bring our barter knives to the gunfights. And, I'm rallying people, I'm holding political events, I'm trying to get people engaged again. And there's just a feeling of morose, I'm sure you're seeing it too on social media and elsewhere, that, where's the accountability? Where's any of the, if all the stuff I documented for 4 years that Trump did to break norms isn't held to account, then those things become the norms. And that's, you know, the slow pendulum of what's happened in our country. Then when there's no consequences for these things, then January 6th becomes something that's normalized. And now Fox News will compare it to people following cursing cinema into the bathroom. No, they're not the same thing. But yeah, we're in a dangerous point in our country, in our democracy.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, anybody that would have showed me a photograph of armed people with military weapons and flak jackets standing outside of state houses with open carry being applied to protest, you know, you'd say, well, if they allow this, you know, pretty soon they're going to be trying to kidnap a governor. Well, they did. And then you say, well, if that can happen, well, maybe they'll storm the Capitol or something else. And then of course it's all happening. So it's hard to.
That's the whole purpose of my project. I mean, the whole idea of like writing down broken norms, and what Trump did over those 4 years is each boundary that he was able to push through, he just went further. And that's why when I started the list, there were 9 broken norms. In a week, when I ended, it was 300. Because a lot more hands in the pie doing the work of deconstructing our government. But they're unabashed about their desire to do so. They want to deconstruct the government from within. They want to seize power and become an authoritarian state. I mean, Steve Bannon is still talking about that very thing. And now they're setting up, and this is what the Republicans do. They have a new not-for-profit or whatever, for-profit in DC that is working to put together a list of people that could run federal agencies and do it more efficiently than Trump did. He was fortunately just an incompetent wannabe authoritarian.
But I mean, a real con artist. But
for the next person, and that's my concern. I'm screaming in my head. I can feel it again in my bones. That if we don't hold to account, what is Merrick Garland doing? What are our elected officials doing? If we don't hold to account and create some consequences and accountability for what went down, then all of this will have been a dry run, as we saw in Germany, as we saw in Russia. These things happen sometimes gradually, and time is fleeting, and we're not doing enough. We're not doing much anything.
Yeah, you have been around long enough, as I have, so that this question has some relevance. Was there a time in the not so distant past when you could have foreseen the moment you and I are sharing today as we talk about this? You know, I've got to admit that, when Hillary was running, I thought, okay, my insider knowledge of white fundamentalist, racist Christians is sort of going to fade into the background. Nice little footnote. Now we're just moving forward. And when she lost and Trump won, and then all these other stages as various shoes keep dropping, a lot of it, now we sort of have normalized it to ourselves. But if you have described this scenario to me, say in 1990, I would have just said, go write a novel or something. But of course, this could never happen. I don't know if you share that.
Yeah, again, what we know, what I learned from doing the list is this was all like a calculated event that Cambridge Analytica, for example, that Steve Bannon and the Mercers taking knowledge that they had that the country was in a mood for a strongman. And they started out with Ted Cruz, and when he lost, they shifted to Trump. But these things, it's not just a mood in our country, it's a mood in the world now. And so would I have imagined this? No. And I also, because I'm a glass half full person, which is the only way I could have gotten through doing the list for 4 years, I thought when Biden won and we started to have the vaccines, I was feeling like joyful and thought all of this was behind us, and started to get, I thought the Republicans would right themselves. I thought Liz Cheney would be leading the House for Republicans, and McConnell had some sense at the very end. I thought they would right themselves and become a normal, and we'd be talking about philosophical debate about social issues and fundamental stuff about fiscal issues and all that, the way our government was supposed to work. But now we're having an argument, and that's why it's so disconcerting what's happening now in DC about whether government makes sense. or whether we should be an authoritarian state. That's actually the argument we're having. And that's what Steve Bannon is still pushing with these groups, to make it such that Biden fails at any cost.
Yeah.
And so therefore the exercise of having a government is a failed exercise.
Including undermining the vaccine.
Not even the
Killing
vaccine.
your own voters. Nothing's off
they
the
want to
table.
shut down our government. These are, the debt limit, all of these, they're just anything to make Biden fail, which is your right in part of the vaccine. But the other thing, if you read, and I read before I started doing the list, if you read up about authoritarianism, we're just following a pattern. Like everything Marcia Gessen wrote in November 2016, after Trump won, everything she warned has come true, because these are predictable patterns. He would undermine institutions. So not only are they undermining our government, one thing she predicted, which is happening right now, is that he would undermine the judicial system and the Supreme Court by stacking it with people that were far right, but also people that were not qualified or mainstream enough. And that certainly happened. I mean, the Pew or Gallup came out last week, and approval for the Supreme Court is the lowest it's ever been.
Yeah, and all our
and other institutions, the FBI, the DOJ. Again, when you break down these institutions and the trust in them, and then you also break down trust in the media, which the trust in the media went from, for Republicans, 75% in 2016. Now it's like 35%.
Yeah.
So Trump did that too in those 5 years. So all of these conditions create an alternative reality, a need to disbelieve what we live in and look for something new. And that's a danger that we're still in if we don't correct things, and our time is really running out.
You're watching or listening to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. I'm talking with Amy Siskind today, author and the founder of The New Agenda. And I'd like to turn the page and just talk about The New Agenda and how you're spending your time between writing and speaking and all these other things, and what you do with The New Agenda and how that is going, and day to day, what that is about. And
so just briefly, my background, when I graduated from college, I worked on Wall Street for 20 years. And at the tail end of that in 2006, as I was retiring from Wall Street, got involved politically when Hillary ran for Senate and then ran for president the first time, which for me was an awakening to sexism, even in our own party, and certainly around the country, but even within our own party. So myself and a group of women in 2008 formed the organization I now run called The New Agenda. And our initial work was really focused around bringing awareness to the notion of sexism and helping more women get into leadership on all sides and in all fields. And we decided in our first meeting to be nonpartisan because we realized it was very clever at the time, but it was very controversial at the time, that sexism against any woman was still sexism. What you allow to happen to one woman is then normalized for all of us. And so fast forward to when Trump took office. And so for the first time, our nonpartisan organization had to make a stand because he was so out of the norm, even for a Republican, what was happening. So in the early parts of his time in office, we started doing, we called them red tent events, named after the Anita Bryant book and the whole idea of red tents biblically, which it's an amazing book if you haven't picked it up. And it was to give people knowledge about what was happening, that it was just so against all women. And where we fast forward to where we are now, I mean, we usually do a big annual event in June that we had to skip last year. It's in person in New York, gets streamed around the country. And all of the satellite events are in person too. We switched to doing it in October, thinking we would be able to do it in person, and 3 weeks before we had to go virtual. So the event lent itself to being virtual, but still we missed the in-person connection. And the other thing, we have a foundation that focuses on campus sexual assault. And up until last year and this year, we would do races on however many, 40. We have a Young Women Leadership Council. They all did races on their campuses to raise awareness of campus sexual assault. But similarly with the pandemic, where all of these things will. So it's sort of my work in giving back and creating. And I thought when Hillary won, it would come full circle, that we had done what we set out to do to get women in leadership and get women to the highest office. But I'm grateful for Biden and for all the women, especially women of color and LGBT women, that he's put forward. And he has the kind of diverse administration that I would have dreamed about. So I'm grateful for that. And that's been our work, is getting more women in leadership. And he really has come through for us on that. And I appreciate that part.
Yeah, a couple of points from my point of view. And this is just strictly personal, of course, but it seems to me that it's a shame that the gravity of the situation, the Democrats on one side seem to recognize what you're saying is true, and that it's not wild and crazy anymore to talk about Germany in the 1930s, for instance, or the Wahhabist regime in Saudi Arabia and similarities with what's going on in Texas. I mean, these are analogies that's 10 years ago. It's like, oh, come on, don't bring up World War II. It's too much, but not now. Now it's legitimate with people like Bannon. And I think in that context, it's just idiocy. This is just me. That there are Democratic leaders who call themselves progressive on one side and moderate on the other, who don't understand that if Biden isn't given some quick successes, we are going to get another 4 years of Trump. And I really believe that.
Or somebody like him who's just.
Or somebody like him.
Yeah. Or maybe more competent version of Trump, which would.
Yeah. And really, at this point, we have to help the Biden presidency succeed.
Yes.
There is no other choice. And there's no quibbling over anything except how do we get this done? That's my point of view. I don't know how you feel.
I agree with you. And as he said yesterday, Biden, 99% of the Democrats are united. It's two people. Yeah. And Manchin, I think so I worked on Wall Street. I ran departments. So I've had to negotiate. That's what I've done for 20 years. Manchin has at least a point of view that is rational. His state is one of the most red states in the country.
Sure.
Sinema, I don't know what her deal is.
Me neither.
I don't think it's just money. I think there's something off there. Her state went to Biden. Her co-senator has been voting with the Biden agenda. So she has no rational reason for behaving the way she's behaving.
Yeah.
So I believe it's something that we don't know sitting here today. That's my instinct, much as my instinct was about Trump not being a Bush or Reagan Republican, as the media cast him for the first 2 years. So my point of view, and I've put my money where my mouth is, I live in New York. Schumer is my senator. And I've said from the beginning, he is not the majority leader for this time. We need a wartime concierge. Yeah. And I've spoken openly about that. His people have come up to Westchester to meet with me, and I gave them the summer. They promised me they would get all of this stuff done before they left for August recess. Then they told all the indivisible groups in New York, by the end of September, all the stuff would be done. And he's just not the person for this job. I happen to be a fan of Amy Klobuchar. I think if she was majority leader, I mean, she's coming to my home Sunday. If anyone listening would like to come reach out to me. If she had an hour with those two in a room, this deal would be done. Schumer is weak. He's not even involved in the negotiation, and it's just not the time for him right now. He's a lovely man, but we need somebody who is strong, ruthless, and a street fighter.
Yeah.
And this is taking way too long. And it's just, the longer it takes, the more poison it gets.
Yeah. And it just gives the opportunity to the Republicans to say, look, this whole thing's going down in flames. We need the strong hand. It's the same thing again. It just plays into the authoritarian model.
Yep. That the government doesn't work. See,
doesn't work.
They have all of it. They still can't get it done. The government doesn't work. So it's so dangerous. And time's just going on. Here we are, October 5th.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I feel exactly the same way. Let me turn the page a little bit here. It seems to me, and now this is always very dangerous because here I am, a man pushing 70, grandfather, father, and so forth. But I have an opinion about what has been done to women in this country. And I float this out as not only a supporter of women's rights, but a rather passionately invested person on this side. But my analysis is that part of the misogyny that America operates under is what I would call fake family values. We pretend to care about women. We pretend to care about families. Happens my daughter's a CEO of a company in New York City. She's 51 years old and raised her 2 children in Finland, where her husband is from, and they've moved back to the States. She worked in Belgium for a while and in Italy. Now she's got a company in New York and lives near you. In Fairfield, I think it is, with offices in the city. But anyway, Jessica was saying something interesting to me the other day that I quote in a new book of mine that's coming out. At the beginning of the book, trying to identify what the problem is, she said, you know, before COVID, you could get away with hiding the fact you had a family and kind of pretend that it was all about work and accept the kind of male-dominated model that came down from the 40s and 50s. After COVID, with people working from home, she said, you know, I was talking to a banker the other day and he whispered and says, I just put my daughter down for a nap, so I've got to talk quietly. The kind of idea that work and life can be separated was obliterated for a while anyway. And that it's time that instead of men who work pretending that it's all about work and not family, and women that work and non-binary people and others, that we put everything on the table on a level playing field and stop giving people very bad choices between either be serious about your career or have a child. Either have a child, and then, you know, if the man you're with is very, very nice, maybe he'll do some dishes and help you a little bit, but it's more normal that you do the childcare. That everything has to be put on the table. We have to look again at this kind of business corporate model of shareholder profit that's been given to us as the bottom line for everything. And instead of that, really discuss life as a whole piece of cloth, including our relationships, and be allowed to have those in the open. So my book puts it a lot better, and I go into a lot of detail on this, and I quote a lot of women who are, you know, from all walks of life, including our mutual friend Jose Zylstra and others. But as someone who was in the corporate world yourself and very successful, and is now doing some other things while advocating for women, I guess my question boils down to what can we do to make the agenda really about being fully human, rather than defining success only in terms that lead to corporate profits. And that's for males, females, non-binary people, the gay community, everyone equally. I just kind of toss that out. Maybe the question's badly put, but I'd like some thoughts on that.
Well, I do think it all comes down to economics in the end, even though you're saying, you know, that I don't agree necessarily with blaming corporate America for our ills. Yeah. Corporate America can be a leader, and they have been in the Trump era for things that are good. Some corporations, we're watching Facebook, clearly evil.
Right, clearly evil.
I mean, the stuff we're learning today is shocking me to the core.
Yeah, me too.
But there are corporations like Apple that are better actors.
Sure.
And really is about leadership. So I don't agree with this whole throw the baby out with the bathwater on corporations. Right. Yeah, so setting that aside, I think a lot of it becomes about economic empowerment. That's always been my opinion. So the Biden agenda and passing things so women can go back to work.
Yes.
It really comes down to economics in part, and then it comes down to our society as a whole. And this is like a whole other conversation, because that's my work for the new agenda.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been a market shift, and it started, ironically, since we're talking about Facebook, when social media started, when the internet started. You can look at data in the 1990s and look from 1960 to 1990, and women making progress in many fields, including STEM, where when I graduated, I believe the data is like a third of the STEM graduates and almost half of economic graduates were women. Yeah. And then we went through this period in the 1990s after the internet started and social media put fire under this, that women were supposed to do things that helped people and not focus on making money, which is sort of a danger of what you're talking about. Yeah. You know, the work that I do with the new agenda, I speak on campuses, and if I have a group of co-ed people and I say, what's more important, making money or helping people, 98% of women will say helping people, and men will say the exact opposite. So I think it's societal attitudes. To me, money is always the basis for everything. It's economic freedom. It doesn't, not that money can make you happy, but if you can't afford to leave the house because you can't pay for childcare, that's why Biden's agenda is so important. If you have to choose between one income and the other, it becomes always on the woman. So economic empowerment is super important to women, and taking a new examination, which I think the pandemic has done, about attitudes. But these are very old attitudes. I mean, there's a reason why we're one of the last countries in the world to not have a woman president. Our country is deeply sexist, including women being deeply sexist. Yeah, and there's a reason why evangelical women vote for white women, voted more for Trump than men, than Hillary. Those are old sexist attitudes of wanting to be taken care of, this whole family attitude, so that's kind of right now. I think Biden has some things in place that will help solve this, but understand that the other force of that, and why we're going to potentially lose Roe v. Wade, is a much darker force that is like a version of the Handmaid's Tale, that wants to suppress women, that wants to, by putting down, you pull up. And so they want to pull up white men and put down people of color and LGBTQ people. And it's just very basically because it's power. So
and it seems to me that one of the things that needs to change is not attitudes only about women. It is the attitude that we men have about our ability to experience sort of empathetic caregiving relationships ourselves as very fulfilling. I've turned down probably 100 university speaking invitations in the last 12 years because I decided that I was going to empower my daughter-in-law, Becky, and my son, John, in their careers and do the childcare for them. And so now Lucy's 13 and Jack is 10 and Nora is 7. And I don't mean I helped out a little bit. I mean, I didn't write for a while. I turned down invitations. I was very glad that I could start drawing on Social Security and Medicare because as a writer and speaker, all these things add up. And weirdly enough, this turned into 12 of the best years of my life. I don't say that it wasn't fraught or difficult, as any parent will know, but I've really been doing this, and including the fact that when I'm done my call here with you, I've already got my shoes on because I'll be running out the door to do Nora's school pickup. I've already got something cooked for her. I'm talking about real childcare, not like put in front of a TV. I mean, read the books. I mean, go places, do stuff, and so on. What surprised me was finding out how, in trying to study a little bit about why this was so fulfilling, it's that, we primates are caregivers, and that if you look at human development and evolution, love is a real thing. It's brain chemistry. It's the way our brains actually operate, and it's the incentive, if you like, the evolutionary incentive, so that we don't kill all our children or each other, because you experience this great passion for them. What I feel sorry for, and what I write to and speak to, is that our culture has put women in a terrible box, because it first put men in a box saying, this is your role, and it's enforced that. So that I met, for instance, a stay-at-home dad the other day whose wife has a very high-powered career. He's loving it, but what he's not loving is the disrespect he gets from other men saying sort of, well, what's wrong? Can't you, as if somehow this is a weird thing. So what I advocate is, why aren't we in a culture where it's totally normal that males and females and non-binary people, gay and otherwise, pair bonded, unpair bonded, swap off in caring, feel perfectly free to have one or the other take different times at different stages of life. And, since when do we have to accept this kind of sexist rulemaking that is just as sexist for men? I don't mean men suffer in the same way. I don't mean that at all. But that, we're handed these things. And I really hope that COVID has given us an opportunity, or forced us, like a memo from Mother Nature, to rethink some of these basic assumptions that apply to us. So I don't really blame the corporate world, but what I do is I say that our culture has locked itself into something that isn't normative even in history. So that, when you go to the big Italian family farm, for instance, there's the wing of the building they built when so-and-so had a child. The grandparents were there helping with the kids. People were at different stages of life. males and females were both working the farm. It wasn't like one person had a career. Everybody had a career. Everybody also helped take care of the kids. It was shared around. And we've broken this model and put in these neat little divisions of men do this, women do that. And I think the whole thing needs to be taken down and taken a look at. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I'm not an expert. I just read whatever zeitgeist out there, but I think the talk right now is the crisis of men and boys. You know, that women are far outpacing men going to college, that men are having, it becomes a whole biological issue similar to what's happening in China, where there aren't enough college educated men to go around for the college educated women. And what happens to the men that then can't get married to a woman that are heterosexual men? They become, as you know, as happened in China, they become more violent, they become more outcasts in society, and that's having, you know, a higher and higher proportion of men. So that's, I'm not an expert. It's just something I'm reading about. But I think, you know, for all of us, one of the most important things we can do is raise good men. And that to me is, you know, for me, the biggest point of pride of what I've done. I mean, I left Wall Street to raise my kids. I was at the apex of my career, and that was what mattered to me.
And are they both boys?
No, a boy and a girl.
A boy and a girl. And you're saying they're doing well?
Yes, and they're good people.
That's
I mean, they're good people. They're grounded. They have empathy. They care about others. And ironically, and this was probably the highest compliment he could have paid me, although he wasn't trying to give me a compliment. My son said to me this summer that he and his friends decided that even though he grew up in a divorced lesbian home with a single parent, that he had the most normal home. And to me as a parent, that was like, okay, my work is done here.
Yeah, my work.
You know, I think for all of us, it's about creating an environment, whether that can be done within a marriage or as a single parent or any, you know, of the different variations, where the kids can laugh and feel loved, and the rest, you know, doesn't matter so much. And that was my focus for those 15 years, getting them out the door to the next part of their life. And I just think it's really important that we raise good men, because I think a lot of families are not raising good men. And the men, white men, I should say white men, still control so much of our culture. And it has to change from within. And that means those white men, we have to raise good white men with empathy, who are not bigoted against women and people of color and LGBT people. But that falls on us as parents. That's, like, to me, job number one.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And basically, with my two sons and my two grandsons, as well as my granddaughters and my daughter, you know, my point has been that the sad thing is it's not just a question of calling people to be their better selves or do something good. The thing that makes me so sad for people is that I know how happy I am as a heterosexual white male of exactly the cohort from an evangelical background where God had put you in charge of everything. How happy I was when I rebelled against that and gave that up and started to see my wife as my best friend, not this piece of chattel property I had to command. It's a tremendous burden being an asshole by divine right. I mean, it really is. And it's not a mistake. It's not an accident that 4 times more cops kill themselves than die in the line of duty. It's not an accident that, you know, my son came out of the Marine Corps having fought in Afghanistan, and he didn't want to sign up again because of just how sad so many of the people were in the more, quote, you know, manly man thing. You know, that aspect has really backfired on men. And of course, they take it out on women and everybody around them, and it's horrible. So, you know, one of the things I've tried to do in this book of mine that comes out November 2nd, Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, is to tell other men, look, it's not me telling you to treat women better. I'm telling you first to treat yourself better. And if you have a woman in your life or a gay partner, whoever, trust me, as this old guy, you know, who has far less ahead than behind him, if I can tell you one thing, you will be happier if they are your friend and not someone you boss around and manipulate. You will be happier. They will too, but you will. And you'll be happier if you have a real relationship with your children, which means doing what my friend Amy did, sitting there today. And that is saying, okay, I have these kids now. Here's a stage of my life. Now I'm really going to pay attention. You're not going to lose by that. Everybody comes out ahead. So I'm not telling anybody what to do, but I'm saying, look, if you want to be happy, your definition of success will sort of determine what that is, because it's what you'll go after. And for me, the human relationships are always more important. And then the funny thing is, like in my daughter's case, she always complains that she's not able to put the fact that she's a wife and a mother and has been working with children as part of her CV. She says, nobody ever says, look, the reason I'm qualified to be CEO of this company is I've learned more from actually being a mom than I have from anything I ever did in business. She said, you can't say something like that. But she said in her case, hey, it's absolutely true. So my plea is just, let's all be whole people and not divide all these little compartments up separately, and rather just say, look, this is the entirety of our human experience. The reason men are doing so badly is they have been deprived. Women have been persecuted, but men have self-deprived themselves, if you can put it this way, of what I really think is the best of life. And without getting maudlin and too Oprah-esque, it's love, and it's experience giving and giving love. And if you cut yourself off from that in order to be a success, you're a real idiot. I mean, it's really sad. I feel strongly about that.
Amen.
Oh, good. Let me ask you what's going on now as we approach the midterms with your political activism and your foundation and everything you're telling people and doing. I mean, I'm asking you what can be done, because I'm sitting here fearful of what's coming, and trying to think of, is there something I'm not thinking of? What can we do?
I think there's a lack of sense of urgency with our elected officials. Not all, we talked about Klobuchar. I think she gets it. She's out pushing voting rights and created a bill for that, realizes that if we don't have the ability to have free and fair elections, that's the foundation of our democracy. So I think our elected officials, whatever party they're in, need to be hearing from us. We need to start gearing up the mindset of the rights that are at stake here, rights, showing up when you can, starting to volunteer as it becomes clear who candidates are. It's important that we keep the Senate. It's important that we keep the House. But in order to do that in the short term, we need to make sure we help Biden succeed, as you and I have been talking about.
Yes.
And even if you don't live in Arizona or West Virginia, go through your Rolodex, or as whatever they say to your Facebook friends. I would say that, but not anymore. And see who does. Some of your friends from high school who moved, or college, or from an organization you're in. Reach out to them and ask them to call Cinema and Manchin. And Schumer and Gillibrand are my senators. I was at an event with Gillibrand earlier in the summer, and she just seemed so lackadaisical and lack of urgency. And I told her staffers, it's not okay. It's not okay. And she's going to lose her primary in 2024. There is a fire going on, and she's got to act like there's a fire in the movie theater and everyone's screaming, not like, oh, well, because we're already a third of the way through our majority, and maybe even halfway through, because soon they'll just be all out campaigning. If we don't get things done, we have nothing to run on. If we don't get things done, we're going to lose our majorities, as fragile as they are already. And our basics, like a free and fair election, are going to start to disappear. So I get that we're all exhausted. Believe me, I'm exhausted too. We are exhausted from 4 years. We're all frustrated. We're all, learned helplessness is the word that keeps coming into my mind. We have to fight that. Like each week, make your calls, show up. And also, I just want to add, and this is super important, the Republican playbook of how they took back the Supreme Court and took back the state legislatures, they're doing that now with school boards. Including the far right, like the Proud Boys in our communities showing up to, we had in our town, one of them show up at our school board meeting. We have to be conscious of local government does a lot. It's not only critical race theory, it's the basis of everything that we do. These local governments are super important in your life, if you think about it. So pay attention to what's happening with the school board. Consider running yourself. or I worked hard for the last 5 years. We finally, in April, the second candidate I supported, have a Black woman on our school board. And she faced so much resistance from this progressive community. Everyone was worried about their white kids and what was going to happen. But we need to have diversity and representation on our school boards. And we need to watch what's happening locally, which I don't think people are paying enough attention to. This is like the wake up call, because we're going to wake up in 20 years and our school boards are going to be held by nut jobs. So get involved now, be awake, and at all levels, we all have to start pitching in again.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, you saw that with all the textbook controversies in Texas, even 20 years ago, where they're rewriting evolution out of the textbook. And that was just a dry run. You know, you talk about this kind of long game, and you think of the way the Federalist Society has nurtured people all the way from the 1980s and 1990s up to the present. And okay, now they're judges everywhere, and how Ralph Reed and these other evangelical right-wing activists gave Trump lists and said, pick from these guys and we'll support you. You don't have a ground game like Hillary does? No problem. We have tens of thousands of churches.
George Conway and these Republicans, they're not our friends. George Conway is a Federalist. He was like, oh, Amy Coney Barrett. No, these people are not our friends. They might be friends of convenience, but they are not our friends. And these organizations exist, and they are here to take away our rights. The Federalist Society is winning. They stacked our Supreme Court. They helped stack our Department of Justice. We are, so we all have to get involved. As one of my friends said, even though we're exhausted, who runs a local indivisible group, we are the cavalry. Nobody is coming to save us on our side. I'm stressed about it, but it's reality.
Yeah, and it's not normal anymore either, in the sense that there aren't two political parties. There's one political party, and that's the Democrats. And then there's this weird hybrid white nationalist kind of strange authoritarian organization trying to discriminate and take away voter rights and all the rest of it.
It's all about taking power. However they do it, discrimination is just a way to take power, to make everyone who's white and male afraid of everyone who's not white and male and Christian and straight. And it's just all about power. If you center it all back on power and wanting to take power and be ruthless and not caring how you get it, that's what we're up against. We don't care.
People who are listening to this in conversation with Frank Schaeffer, with Amy Siskind, and want to get in touch with you are going to find it easy to do so, because we're going to post links to everything everywhere. So you don't have to spell out websites and stuff. It'll all, anywhere this is listened to. And I would urge people to get in touch with you. If folks do want to get in touch with you and quote, do something as in hook into what you're doing, talk about, just briefly, you don't have to say how, because we're going to post everything, but what is the range of things where they can tap in and get more of what you have to say and help you do what you do?
I think follow me on social media. I'm very active, especially on Twitter. With what I'm up to. Facebook, I'm in a love-hate relationship, mostly hate. But I do have a fairly active presence there as well. And you know what, I'm sort of like, I described it to a friend yesterday as like, I'm a squirrel gathering nuts right now and trying to catch my breath and get re-engaged, because I'm afraid that I'm going to be back to doing the list. And I think it's coming out tomorrow, because I just signed the contract. The list as a whole collection will be archived at a major university. I won't get out in front of them. So it will be free and accessible for future generations to write about what happened with Trump. I also have a podcast that I did throughout the Trump era, but now I do it. It's called Our Return. It was supposed to be Our Return to Normal, but now it's Democracy at Risk. It's called the Weekly List Podcast, and I do a podcast which will also be archived around times when there's major happenings, like when Liz Cheney was kicked out of leadership.
How often do you record a podcast and you speak, you interview? What's the format?
No, I just speak. I used to do it once a week when the list came out, every Sunday, to kind of summarize and go through things verbally. But now I do it again when there's major events to kind of draw attention to what's happening. And again, it was coming out, going to be a project of returning to normalcy. And I was talking about things we were doing to return to normalcy. And then I shifted over the summer to Democracy at Risk, because it became clear to me that we were in the third inning of our fight against authoritarianism, not at the end. So you can find that either on the Weekly List website, and those will also be archived for future generations. But now I'm just talking about the threats and what's happening, and just to make people aware, as the list makes people aware.
How often do you present at colleges, or I should say on Zoom to colleges these days, or how much is your speaking related to kids' school?
I'm a reluctant Zoomer. I did this with you, but I really am waiting to go back to in-person stuff. When I was before the pandemic and before the list, I did a lot of college speaking, and then during the list and during that, I really focused my work on the list and going around the country and talking about, I call myself an activist for democracy. That's really what I'm trying to do with my work. So I think we'll just have to see where things are for next year. I'm not making plans per se, and let's see if we can get back to in-person. Let's see what happens in the next year with Republicans stepping, us being able to, as Democrats, since we have control, get things done, as opposed to giving the Republicans the ball and walking away. Yeah.
Well, Amy Siskind, thank you so much for all your advocacy, the work you do, for talking to me today, and for everything that you represent, and for this may sound inappropriate, too personal again, but I love the fact that your children are the kind of people you describe them to be, and well done on the family. Your parents, who are gone now, would be very proud of you and pleased for their grandchildren. So thank you so much. And I'm participating with Gareth Higgins in a porch course coming up at the new part of the year, January, February, about my book, Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet. Be happy. If you want to be part of the porch course, please go to visit porchcourses.com, and no one will be turned away if they can't meet. I think it's like $49 for the whole course, but if you don't have the money, just say so and it's free. So thank you so much, Amy, for being with me today. Thank you, Jose Zelstra, a mutual friend, for introducing us. And blessings on what you're doing. Please stay in touch. Let us know if you ever have something you want promoted or talked about. We will promote it and talk about it.
Wonderful. It was a fun hour. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.